Perfect. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Just quickly at the top, I want to go over a couple of quick housekeeping pieces and introductions before we dive into the presentation. So just to let you know, the session will be recorded and the slides will be shared at the end. We'll also save some time for Q&A at the end of the presentation, but please do drop your questions in the chat as they come up, and we'll follow up with anything that we don't get to over email. So on to quick introductions. My name is Maria Bianculli. I'm a manager with Agendi in our New York City office. And I'm joined today by my colleagues Shannon Geiger-Risden, also a manager based in South Carolina, and Andreas Kalantonis, a senior associate consultant in our London office. So some quick information on Agendi. We are a specialized climate and sustainability consulting firm, working mostly with large global organizations to design and implement their sustainability strategies and goals. We support our clients on the full spectrum and life cycle of sustainability initiatives, so from knowledge and capacity building, helping them understand their impact, supporting strategic planning, enabling action, as well as assisting in reporting and disclosures. So this broad scope of support includes greenhouse gas emissions calculations, ESG materiality assessments, of course, including CSRD aligned double materiality assessments or DMAs, and defining net zero strategies and plans on achieving long-term commitments. We also practice what we preach, hence Agendi is B Corp certified and an accredited partner of CDP, and we have our own science-based targets in place. So with those quick introductions out of the way, I'll hand it to Shannon to walk us through today's agenda.
Thanks so much, Maria, and thank you all for joining today. No matter where you are in your sustainability journey, there have been a lot of recent changes with Omnibus and beyond. So there may be some uncertainty lingering about where to go from here, especially on the foundational requirements for some of the CSRD elements like double materiality. But it's important to emphasize at the beginning of this call that materiality and even double materiality, it's not going anywhere. Forward-facing organizations know that sustainability is about driving business value, not just ticking compliance boxes. And regulatory delays or changes to reporting requirements may require a pivot, but for companies focused on the bigger picture, like minimizing risks and maximizing impacts, understanding priority, this is just good business. So our goal today is to share how to maximize the value of materiality assessments in today's global and dynamic regulatory environment. We'll start by level setting materiality and the different types of approaches available, and then we'll walk through some common benefits and differences across those approaches. We'll dive in next to the various materiality frameworks and the regulatory guidance that can be leveraged to select the right approach for your organization. And then finally, we'll provide a little more guidance for completing an EFRAG-aligned DMA and share both practical approaches for integrating results into your business strategy and actionable ways to leverage these results for strategic insights. So got a great agenda for you today. Let's go ahead and jump in and stop us at any time with your questions in the question box, and we'll try and answer as we go or at the end. So just to level set, conducting a materiality assessment is really an integral part of any organization's sustainability journey because it pinpoints priority areas to guide your ESG strategy and your planning. So what exactly is a materiality assessment? This is a structured process of engaging with both internal and external stakeholders to identify and prioritize the most material environmental, social, and governance topics to an organization. It can be thought of kind of like a filter to identify what's most important in a specific point of time. So just as sustainability regulations have evolved over time, so have materiality assessments. The chart shown here breaks down the three key approaches today, each increasing in detail, complexity, as well as strategic value. Single materiality on the left-hand side is the traditional approach that most are familiar with. It's been around for almost 20 years. And this approach focuses only on financial materiality or the risks and opportunities to the organization. This can be thought of as an inward-facing perspective, and it's often the approach most familiar to leadership as it mirrors common risk management best practices. Now, moving to the right, double materiality, on the other hand, considers financial materiality, that inward perspective, as well as what's called impact materiality. And impact materiality considers the outward impacts. So this is how an organization affects the outside world, society, the environment. And while the high-level concept of double materiality is common between the middle and the right side image, the frameworks that govern their delivery vary. So on the far right here, an EFRAG-aligned double materiality assessment is much more specific in how it's delivered and acts as a foundational requirement for CSRD compliance. And while compliance with CSRD disclosure has been a key driver recently in pursuing these EFRAG-aligned double materiality assessments, the structured, data-driven, and evidence-focused approach it requires really makes it the best in practice option available today. Regardless of the approach that you select, there are common benefits of completing a regular materiality assessment across all of these approaches. It identifies relevant strategic priorities, incorporates broad stakeholder engagement to really capture that voice of the customer and the client, prioritizes initiatives across time horizons because you're typically trying to explore a dynamic perspective of not just today, but as well as the future. It complements very nicely with risk management processes that organizations often have in place and reflects a time-stamped perspective. It's common that materiality assessments are repeated either in the second or third year to really capture any changes in an organization or a company with either mergers, acquisitions, or major business changes. And lastly, it supports ESG reporting. So this is often something that is published or disclosed in a sustainability or an impact report to provide emphasis on what are the most important elements to the organization. So these assessments, when done regularly, really set an organization up for success, not just by focusing on the right sustainability initiatives, but ensuring business resilience by identifying new opportunities to help the company to thrive. So today we'll be comparing and contrasting a few of these approaches and provide insights on the applicable frameworks to help guide you no matter where you are in your journey. And whether you've only done a single materiality or no materiality assessment at all, any step up this ladder is a step in the right direction. And because materiality assessments are strategic imperatives that act as almost a compass to help you navigate risks and capitalize on opportunities, it really does help build long-term strategic value for your organization. So let's briefly compare and contrast these approaches. Likely you're familiar with the traditional approach of single materiality. When we compare this approach against double materiality, particularly the EFRAG-aligned approach, there are 6 major differences and some overlap. So as we already covered on the previous slide, single only focuses on financial materiality versus double also includes that impact materiality element, which forces the organization to look outside itself and how it affects the outside world. And this really also affects the level of granularity. Traditional materiality assessments prioritize sustainability topics. And these are kind of like high-level umbrella topics that are relevant or potentially material to the organization. But once you move into a double materiality, this expands on each of those material topics into impacts, risks, and opportunities, or IROs, that encompass both the financial and the impact elements of each. When it comes to boundaries as well, importantly, all of these should be representative of the company's value chain as well when it comes to double materiality, which goes beyond the old disclosure of direct operations and strategy of the single materiality approach. On top of that, any subsidiaries, value chain, or key business areas for a double materiality are traditionally rolled up to the results, although there are variations in how this can be delivered in a CSRD compliant way, versus traditional approach typically just explores the consolidated group level disclosure. Time horizons are also another differentiating point. Traditional approach, of course, looks at the short term, but the dynamic elements of materiality are often a little more vague for single or the non-EFRAG double materiality, whereas the EFRAG aligned double materiality requires medium and long term to be considered within the assessment. In terms of guidance, which I'll pass to Andreas in a moment to expand on, single materialities leverage SASB and ISSB, while CSRD falls under the European Financial Reporting Advisory Group standards, or EFRAG. So I'll pass it to Andreas to expand on some of these frameworks a little bit more.
Thank you very much, Shannon. Good morning, good afternoon to everyone, accounting for all time zones. I will now be spending some time to walk you through on how materiality varies across the regulatory and framework landscape. But first, it's important to remember that a materiality assessment is a snapshot in time of the most material focus areas. While some benefits that were highlighted before underline strategic direction, materiality assessments are also critical when it comes to voluntary reporting frameworks, various ESG schemes, and mandatory reporting where compliance is necessary. A refreshed assessment is suggested every 2 to 3 years to ensure relevancy, or annually if an organization is expected to have any significant mergers, acquisitions, or overall structural changes. Now, let's focus briefly on the various reporting frameworks, how they compare and how they contrast. Starting with the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, easier known as SASB. This is a global framework. It emphasizes financial materiality since it considers that a fact is material if its omission or simply misstatement is likely to alter an investor's decision, therefore making the whole framework very focused on the information that impacts those investors themselves. Then we have the International Sustainability Standards Board, or easier known as the ISSB. This framework aims for global application, of course, subject to jurisdictional adoption. Like the SASB, the focus is on financial materiality, using a definition that centers on information that could reasonably influence an investor's decision. Moving on to the third column, we have the GRI standards, also known as the Global Reporting Initiative Standards. And these take a broader view. They're globally applied and they center on impact materiality. This means that the undertaking companies consider topics that represent their most significant impacts on the economy itself, the environment, the people, always including human rights. Therefore, they're addressing a wider range of stakeholders that include employees, customers, suppliers, regulators, and not just investors. Finally, we have the very famous EFRAG. This is known as the European Financial Reporting Advisory Group. I know those abbreviations are too much. This can be found within the EU, and they bring a mandatory element depending on the undertaking company's size and listing. It uniquely requires double materiality, considering both the financial effects as well as the impacts on the people and the environment over a short, a medium, and a long-term time horizon. This ensures a comprehensive view, addressing the various concerns of a broader spectrum of stakeholders. Therefore, the key difference lies in the type of materiality each framework prioritizes. Some focus on the financial impact for investors, like SASB and ISSB, while others, like the GRI and EFRAG, broaden the scope to include the company's impact on the society and the environment. This distinction is always vital for understanding how companies' approach is and the report on their sustainability efforts. Now, let's talk about how these various frameworks apply to different company scenarios, as it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. Starting with scenario A, that's where we meet companies in earlier stage of maturity. If your company's disclosures are completely voluntary, you have not done much in terms of materiality in the past, or simply CSRD is not in your radar, we recommend starting with a solid financial materiality assessment. Think about leveraging ISSB for the financial materiality aspects. Even a small step is always a beneficial one. That's what we like to say. And as you mature, you can always expand to a double materiality approach. Then we move to scenarios B and C. And these are linked to companies that have a growing ESG maturity or sustainability maturity. If you're a company with voluntary disclosures in mind and some experience with materiality assessments, either an older assessment that has been developed in the past or a current double materiality assessment that's in progress, and you're either outside CSRD scope or you recently fell outside given the latest news, you have a decision to make. Do you want to pursue or continue with an IFRAG-aligned double materiality assessment? This question will basically depend on your future CSRD outlook, namely if you anticipate to fall within CSRD scope, let's say because of a future merger, or depending on the progress of your current double materiality assessment. If the answer to this question is a no, then a comprehensive double materiality assessment using ISSB for the financial and GRI for the impact aspects, respectively, is the best choice. If you do want to go or continue with the IFRAG route, then you ought to follow their guidelines for compliance and assurance readiness. Finally, we have scenario D, which is probably the most straightforward. If your company already is or anticipates falling within CSRD scope, then a full IFRAG-aligned double materiality assessment is the clear path. Ultimately, the right approach depends on your company's specific circumstances. We at Agendi are here to help you navigate this. Whether you need clarity on your CSRD applicability or general assistance in developing a tailored assessment or strategy, feel free to reach out to us. I will now pass it on to my colleague Maria, who will walk you through the key steps in conducting an IFRAG-aligned double materiality assessment.
Perfect. Thank you, Andreas and Shannon, for taking us through those foundations of materiality. Like Andreas mentioned, I'll now walk us through what this looks like in practice, using that IFRAG-aligned double materiality assessment as our example. So as Andreas mentioned, as part of our core services, Agendi supports our clients in completing best practice IFRAG-aligned double materiality assessments using a bespoke, auditor-ready, step-by-step process that you see here. Of course, each of these steps must be tailored to the specific organization completing the assessment, but we found that following this core structure maximizes efficiency and ensures compliance with the IFRAG and ESRS guidance, especially IFRAG's implementation guidance, IG1 on materiality and IG2 on value chain analysis. So those first 5 steps that you see really set up the assessment process before bringing anything forward to stakeholders, and as such are not necessarily sequential but build on each other. Ideally, before asking stakeholders for their input on IROs or for any scoring on IROs, you should have your value chain mapping and IRO inventory complete and have set your materiality thresholds and time horizons to ensure that as you go through the process, the criteria are applied consistently across the assessment. So to kick off this process in this step-by-step way, you should start with that context setting and information gathering. At this point, we'll seek to understand as much as we can about the organization in the context of CSRD specifically. So we'll look at core business activities, value chain relationships, any previous sustainability and financial reporting that exists, and understand who those key affected stakeholders are and who's going to be using your sustainability statement. That's the output of this entire exercise. Using the information gathered about the organization during that step, we'll next develop a short list of potentially material sustainability topics. So this list should be as comprehensive as possible and include as many potential material matters as possible to ensure that nothing important slips through the cracks and that everything is brought forward to the assessment to be evaluated for its materiality. A CSRD compliant materiality assessment must include an evaluation of key upstream and downstream value chain partners. So that's where that value chain analysis comes in. And the results of that will feed into any critical sustainability topics of the organization's partners. And those will feed into that short list of your own organization as well. Once that shortlist is finalized, we'll move on to developing that inventory of impacts, risks, and opportunities, or IROs. So using those sustainability topics as umbrella categories, we'll develop the list of IROs specific to the organization that sit beneath each one of those sustainability matters. This list of IROs, it'll come from a number of places, but it might come from previous risk reporting, as well as desktop research and consultation with your internal expert stakeholders. Finally, before moving forward to that stakeholder engagement piece, we'll set those materiality thresholds and time horizons. Those thresholds will dictate when an IRO and its related sustainability matter are determined material or not. And those time horizons are important to define before scoring so that stakeholders can give feedback on an IRO in the short term, medium term, and long term. Ideally, at this point, it's not mandatory, but ideally, your auditor will be involved as early as possible to ensure that any specific documentation they're looking for or any other specific requirements they may have are considered proactively and met before going through the entire process. So once that assessment framework is set, the critical element of stakeholder engagement comes in. EFRAG doesn't mandate how or which stakeholders are engaged, but it is essential that there is broad and justified and explained participation by stakeholders. So you may ask stakeholders for feedback through questionnaires, through surveys, through workshops, through interviews, but overall it's key to document each stakeholder's perspective and understanding of each IRO. EFRAG does provide scoring dimensions of scale, scope, irremediability, and severity, which we won't dive too deeply into, but each IRO should be scored against each of these dimensions. Who does this scoring is an organization-specific decision, so it might be your internal subject matter experts, like your ESG team, or your functional areas within the business, or you may use stakeholder feedback to inform those scores or have stakeholders contribute directly to the scoring itself. The score an IRO receives determines its materiality result according to those thresholds that you had set earlier in the process. Finally, as mentioned, an essential component throughout this entire process is documentation. It's really important to record key decisions and processes throughout the assessment and to aggregate this information in a usable, reviewable way that auditors can review and approve. Of course, these are a lot of steps. This might be a daunting process, especially for a first-year double materiality assessment. But the good news is that a comprehensive year one double materiality assessment sets you up for a really stronger, more efficient refresh in future years. We've supported numerous clients through this process. So we're, of course, here to help answer any questions on completing the DMA. But if we want to shift to the next slide, we can talk through what those year two efficiencies might look like. So as I mentioned, the first year reporting can be a heavy lift, but one of the questions that we often get is, do I have to do this again every single year? The answer is no. There's not an expectation that the list of material IROs will change much year on year, so those results are probably going to stay pretty true year on year. So much of that work that you've done in year one can be carried forward so long as it remains relevant. By implementing that comprehensive first-year DMA, you are setting yourself up for maximum efficiencies in future year materiality assessments. So what do these efficiencies actually look like? First, a well-documented process inclusive of key decisions and logic, justifications for scores given to IROs, and clear explanations of materiality decisions are critical in that first-year materiality assessment. But having those components in place sets you up to more easily review and refresh that previous year's process, in that you can review previous results against any significant company changes and evaluate whether scores or materiality determinations need to be adjusted. Next, ensuring that your first year DMA is well aligned with that EFRAG guidance enables you to monitor for changes and evolutions in the standards rather than completely recreating the wheel year on year. Of course, we all know that CSRD continues to evolve, so there are certainly updates to be keeping track of, but that strong first-year double materiality assessment will likely remain valid throughout these fluctuations. Third, as alluded to above, it all comes back to those results. So the core output of the DMA The results that indicate the materiality of certain IROs or sustainability topics do not need to be overhauled year on year. In successive years, there isn't a need to do a full rescoring of every single IRO. Rather, you should just be able to revisit results and determine if they're still accurate or require minor revisions based on changing context within the company. Finally, sticking to that theme of high-quality documentation, a structured, traceable data collection process in year one will enable you to strengthen and solidify those now established processes in year two. Data collection will include understanding significant value chain relationships and spend, stakeholders and their perspectives, as well as that scoring of material topics, among other things. So in year two, you'll have the opportunity to address any gaps in the data from that first year double materiality assessment. So thinking about, were there any areas in which the quality of data was weaker or required more assumptions and estimations that we would have liked? Were there potential blind spots? How can we solve for these in year two and beyond? So the number of efficiencies to be gained, but beyond those efficiencies, moving on to the next slide, future materiality assessments can build on that strong year one foundation by both taking practical, implementable steps to integrate processes within existing business systems, as well as leveraging those results for broader strategic insights beyond simple compliance. So first, on the left-hand side, thinking about those practical next steps. First, an organization might look for ways to automate its ESG data collection where possible by taking advantage of tools and software. You also might look to integrate this data into your existing systems and tools, so thinking about the functionality of current software that you use and how it might be beneficial in the ESG data collection and or management process. Coming out of the materiality assessment, your organization might have identified gaps in internal validation and governance processes, including data and process ownership, going through that process, saying who actually owns this, or leadership review and sign off, making sure that you have the right processes in place to get that review and sign off. This represents a great opportunity to better define those pieces to benefit future years' assessments, as well as broader company goals. Looking at alignment with other reporting coming out of the double materiality assessment and CSRD process more broadly, you'll see that there's significant overlap with other reporting obligations that you might already be responding to. So this is a great time to identify those efficiencies and reduce the duplicative work wherever possible. Finally, having completed that first year double materiality assessment, you'll want to continue building internal awareness and knowledge across all of the functional areas within your organization to ensure future buy-in and minimize those roadblocks that you might have encountered in that first year DMA. Looking at the right side, we're also thinking about practical steps that you can take to utilize these materiality results, not simply for compliance, but for broader strategic insights as well. So that might look like tracking peer and industry leader disclosures to give you insights and inspiration for future years reporting, but that'll also ensure that you're continuing competitive positioning by maintaining best practices in your own reporting. Speaking again to the alignment of ESG and other related reporting, utilizing those materiality results to inform financial disclosures in particular will help you meet investor and broader stakeholder expectations. A third key insight to be gained is through those stakeholder interactions that are so critical to the materiality assessment. The feedback that you receive can be utilized not just for scoring IROs, but to inform a broad range of organizational functions. Finally, the materiality of certain IROs should inform other business processes and decision-making. So this could look like internal workforce policies and processes, or product design considerations, or environmental impacts. The materiality assessment as a compliance exercise is just the beginning, and the results shouldn't be shelved after completion as they contain critical insights relevant to the whole business, broader than just compliance. And so finally, shifting to the last slide, I know we've covered a lot today, but I will try to distill and recap those key messages here before we move into Q&A. I think a key takeaway should be that materiality assessments are so much more than just compliance, right? They are an opportunity to learn key information about your organization. All businesses have material issues, and it is simply good business to be proactively identifying and mitigating risks, as well as the flip side of taking advantage of opportunities. Um, Despite all of the recent upheaval in mandatory ESG reporting, we're seeing surveys from executives that demonstrate the vast majority still intend to integrate the sustainability and financial data into core decision making to drive business value, not just to check boxes. As we've mentioned, that broad stakeholder engagement is an incredible opportunity to hear from key partners, customers, employees, whoever that you might not otherwise hear from. These diverse perspectives will give you more data to work with and to incorporate into decision making that benefits everybody involved. Finally, sustainability is not going anywhere, as Shannon mentioned, so now is not the time to pull back. Delays, rollbacks of regulatory requirements should suggest adjustments to internal strategies, not doing away with those strategies altogether. There's still going to be investor expectations to meet, state and local regulations to comply with, and strategic benefits, frankly, to gain by pursuing a well-designed sustainability strategy. And materiality sets the foundation for all of that. So with that all said, I want to thank you all for your time. I see some Q&A in the chat. We hope this session was useful to you, but we'll now pause to answer some of those questions.
Yeah, I see the first one in the chat, Maria, is asking about an example of those potentially material sustainability topics. And can you give an example of one that isn't on the EFRAG topics list or kind of the ESRS AR16?
It's a bit tough to give an example because by definition, this is going to be a company specific topic, right? There's always that, and EFRAG asks you to do that company specific evaluation. Their list is just a starting point. It's a core list of core ESG issues for you to choose from, but they're also asking you to come up with those custom topics and custom IROs to supplement what they've provided. So thinking of maybe the manufacturing space, maybe there's going to be a product specific topic that you come up with. Maybe there's going to be a process specific topic that you come up with. You're not restricted to that core list of ESRS topics. And it's actually best practice to kind of think outside of that box and think more broadly about anything that's specific to your organization. So sorry, I can't give a more concrete answer on that, but it really is an organization-specific decision.
Business context really comes into play on that one. Absolutely. The next question has to do with what can I say to my leadership team to encourage them to complete this exercise? I imagine they mean the double materiality exercise in absence of the compliance requirement due to Omnibus. I'll take that one. I think that's a really great question that many organizations are facing with some of the Omnibus updates here. I would say if you are in the middle of your double materiality assessment and you've already created a structure and a path and a plan to deliver this, I would suggest continuing on that path and doing the best you can to align with the ESRS and the EFRAG guidance to identify those priority inward and outward facing topics to your organization. It does give you a little bit more lenience without requiring compliance or a mandatory disclosure. So you could lean a little bit more on the GRI guidance and certainly proceed without requiring that assurance element, which makes it a more simplified, streamlined process. But at the end of the day, just reiterating some of the things we kicked off with in the sense that this is an opportunity to identify priority areas, prioritize your sustainability initiatives, and really identify opportunities with a broad stakeholder group, which could include internal and external. As Maria indicated, it's a real opportunity to touch base with your voice of customer, your clients, your value chain to understand what's important to them and align to best represent the organization and present the best picture for your investors and stakeholders. and happy to help you craft a statement to your leadership or provide more encouraging business-specific details if you like. The next question touches on how much effort it takes to complete each of the different materiality approaches. And this is another great question that depends a bit on your organization. I'll throw some guesses out there, and Maria and Andreas, feel free to hop in, but depending on the size of your organization, the complexity, the breadth of the type of work that your organization does, Agendi is sector agnostic, so we serve almost many, and if not all of the sectors. But for a single materiality, I would estimate between like 3 and 5 months of time. That can certainly be expedited if you have a clear definition of your stakeholders and it's a smaller organization. It could be much more on the shorter side of that. For a double materiality that is EFRAG aligned, I would estimate at the very fastest, maybe like a 4-month, and probably the longest to 6 to 7 months of effort. And with a non-EFRAG aligned, probably somewhere in between that. Maria and Andreas, I don't know if you'd have anything to add.
I hate to give this answer twice, but it really is organization specific, right? It's going to depend on the internal connections that you already have, how quickly you can get those stakeholder feedback, those scores together, how well you already know your value chain and your stakeholders. So again, I think it is a pretty organization specific question. Maybe I can jump in here with another answer on, can you expand on the stakeholder engagement process and timing related to the DMA process? Should there also be engagement earlier in the process to help inform steps 1 and 2? I think that's a great question. The guidance does not mandate how and when stakeholders are involved. So yes, absolutely, they can be involved to inform earlier steps. You can be collecting that feedback either in a structured way or a less formal way if you already have ongoing dialogue with your stakeholders, internal and external. So if you already have a customer or supplier relations team that's having ongoing conversations, getting their input wherever in the process is going to be valuable. If you're documenting what that input is and who they are, why they can speak to it. So yes, they absolutely can be involved throughout the process. We've found that it makes a lot of sense to involve them when there is something for them to give feedback on. So once you do have that IRO inventory drafted, maybe before you finalize it, getting their input on that, or that more formal scoring of IROs. It streamlines it a bit and makes it easier on everyone if they have something to respond to rather than kind of asking for broader, more general input. But again, you can absolutely take advantage of ongoing conversations to utilize that as part of your stakeholder engagement requirement.
I see one other question on materiality assessments as being a snapshot in time, and how often do significant shifts in material topics occur? What are some triggers? That's a great question. A materiality assessment, as you heard us say earlier, is not just a one and done. It's suggested that you do repeat this exercise annually, or at least every 2 to 3 years. An annual update could occur because of a merger and acquisition, a change in product scope, or expansion of business strategy to explore other areas that weren't previously a large part of the scope of the business that might shift those potentially material sustainability topics. So I would say those are some of the key things that we've seen trigger more frequent refresh and materiality assessment, but it also provides a lot of insight if you do multiple time horizons for each exercise so that you can anticipate those changes with your stakeholder engagement exercises as well.
Just to sorry, Shannon, just to jump in and touch a bit on the second bit of that question, asking about some very common triggers. Can just throw one in there. We've seen some clients in the past thinking about recent or very rapid technological changes that have happened in the last few years, and these can, of course, create new risks and opportunities to them. One of these examples would be the increased rise of AI overall. And this can, of course, raise concerns about many issues like data privacy, ethical implications, and therefore gives the opportunity for more risks to occur for a specific company.
That's a great example. Thanks, Andreas. I see one last question I don't think we've covered about ISSB standards. Can you explain a bit better if ISSB standards remain voluntary? You also mentioned that they are adopted by some governments.
Yes, happy to give some context there. So while the IFRS Foundation, which is the one responsible for developing the ISSB standards, doesn't mandate the application of those standards, companies can still choose to voluntarily apply them, particularly in jurisdictions or countries where sustainability reporting is not yet mandated. And that is because companies want to meet those demands from investors or to just keep in trend with globally comparable sustainability disclosures.
Thanks, Andreas. I think that's all the questions we see. Any other questions, feel free to drop it in the chat. Else, feel free to reach out to us at the email addresses noted on the slide here for any follow-up questions, or if there's anything that Agendi can do to help you in your sustainability journey. As Maria mentioned, we'll share the slides and the link to all the participants after this call, and just want to say thank you for your time and for joining us today on this webinar session.